You don't have to be an artist to be a great graphic designer. Graphic design is about communication, and communication is about clarity, isn't it? Like when we hear about design and people say, like, how do you want your design to look, David? I say, oh, well, I want it to look friendly. And sooner or later, the word clean comes up, doesn't it? When we talk about good design, when we talk about clean design, people are like, yes, that is good design. And so when we start talking about, well, what does clean really mean? I mean, we all get it when we see it, right? But what does it mean? Why do our brains like cleanliness so much? An evolutionary biologist will tell you that we like cleanliness because clean means germ free. And then if you like clean, you don't get a disease and die. And so we pass that on through evolution, right? Neuroscientists, cognitive neuroscientists come along and say, that's nice and everything, but that's not really what clean really is. Today, we will subscribe to what cognitive neuroscientists aim cleanliness at. And here's what it means. Ready? Check it out. We've got a slide for it. Clean means easy. And specifically, clean means easy for your brain. You know how when you clean up your house, you look around and you're like, oh, it feels so easy. You know what I'm talking about, right? That's what we're going to do today with graphic design. The thing is, if clean means easy for your brain, there's a ton of studies on how we think, on how we work, on what's easy for us, and on what makes something difficult. Aren't there? Aren't there? And so if we understand that, then we can just apply some rules that make things easy for our brain and things look way better, way better, which you don't have to be as an artist. In fact, sometimes art gets in the way of good design. You've seen that. It's beautiful, but like, it's hard to understand. That's somebody who grew up drawing a lot and said, I want to be able to pay rent. And so they go to school to become a graphic designer when what they really want to be is an artist. We're going to let all of that go. Today, we will follow rules. What you might consider doing is grabbing something to write with. Go ahead. I'll wait. Because when you write something down, it stays 4 times as long in your head. In our Gravity hands-on workshops, we take a minute and stop and talk about how all of this works. And we go back and forth and decide when we'll use it and when we need it. Then we get our hands in it and really do stuff. We come out of these workshops with gorgeous documents that people are blown away. So today we can make sure to take notes as we go. And if you have questions, please feel free to pop those into the chat and we will attend to them. All right, here's what we've got as far as half an hour. What we're really talking about is, I mean, when you think about Nike, when you think about Apple, you have thoughts about that, right? You can pop those in the chat. Like, what's the Nike brand feel like to you? What's the Apple brand feel like to you? Maybe the Amazing Gravity Learning brand. Like, what does that all feel like? It has that feel, it has that nicety to it, doesn't it? Now, here's the interesting thing. Yeah, Apple is slick and Nike is kind of slick. Lots of about the way they look. We sort of translate that all into looks, don't we? Here's the question. Consider your personal brand. When people think of you, what would you like them to think of you as? And you know what's interesting? People make up their mind what they think about you in less than an eighth of a second. In less than an eighth of a second, they see you and they decide how they think about you. And it's all through looks. It's all through looks, isn't it? So when your documents show up, when your emails show up, when your slide decks show up, when your reports show up, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Your main goal, again, if you're going to center on something right now, your main goal is to make it easy. If it feels easy, it'll feel like it looks good. Making sense? Yeah, it's less than an eighth of a second actually. So let's start right here. Here's what's important to understand. People don't read business communications in the same way that they read novels. You're in a big novel and you're absorbing everything. And you're like, this is amazing. And then you get an email and you're like, this is amazing, except you're not. You're like, I scan it, right? You do. You just go, kind of all your way through it. How many big emails have you gotten or received where you're like, oh my goodness, get to the point, right? Right? If that's true, if humans scan emails and reports and websites, by the way, as well, then what we need to do a little bit is think about How does that work? What are we looking at? Let's start right here. There's somebody who posts things on LinkedIn every once in a while. And if you get the chance, you can follow that somebody. Uh, here's a before and here's an after. Before, after. The second one looks quite a bit easier, doesn't it? Right? Here's what's going on. That when we see a big paragraph, we don't want to read that big old paragraph because it looks hard to read. That doesn't mean that it is hard to read. It just looks hard to read, doesn't it? So we're like, no thanks. And we skip. Here, if you want to write a thing down, here it comes. Ready? This is the big old rule. Um, People started scanning paragraphs instead of reading paragraphs when that paragraph passes 2 lines long. 2 lines is all you get. When you get to 4 lines, 70% of people don't even attempt to read it. This is email communication, is what we're talking about now, but also in like written reports. 70%. And you're there writing these beautiful long paragraphs. Nobody reads that stuff because it looks hard to read. Let's take a look at it again. Do you buy it? Do you want to read that? What is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a tiny bit of 6? Nobody wants to read that stuff. You know what I mean? Right. By the way, this comes out of fantastic research that started in the 1940s. The US Navy hired 2 psychologists named Fleisch and Kincaid because the sailors weren't able to read the manuals that they made for sailors. So they're like, hey, Fleisch and Kincaid, figure this stuff out. What they did was they made a grade reading scale. And they figured out that when you start writing, uh, and the writing looks too complicated, people are just going to skip it, and they have a hard time with it. The things that go into that are length of sentences, length of words, and average paragraph size. The paragraph size is the most important one. If you're going to make a rule from now on, you might consider keeping your paragraphs down to 2 lines or less. Making sense? Now, one of the things that you might also consider is that when people are scanning, check it out. Ready? That when people scan, what they look at is content and titles, don't they? If you scan down this, do you see how the titles kind of stand out? Right? It says content, support materials, meeting participation. And do you see how all the paragraphs are 2 lines or less? And it looks pretty easy to read. In fact, if you look at it, it looks kind of graphically designed, doesn't it? And all we did was title sections and keep paragraphs to 2 lines or less. Neat, isn't it? All right, if you're taking 2 big rules so far, 2 big rules, it's title as many sections as you can. These are in reports, in documents, in emails. I know we don't title paragraphs in emails, but now maybe we'll start. Slide decks, all that business. Any questions popping up? Fantastic. Okay. Hey, real quick, if you have access to the chat, can you give me a yes if you're kind of sick of super jam-packed slide decks? People show you a slide and it's just so full of stuff you can't even look at it. You know what I'm talking about? Jason gave me a double yes. Yeah, well, the thing is we go to school for so many years learning how to write well, don't we? We don't go to school learning how to visually lay things out or visually design. So, of course, what we end up doing when we're dealing with things like slides is we just put everything on the screen. We just put all of our thoughts on the screen. So, we're going to build some rules around that as well. These rules, like everything else at Gravity Learning, will be research supported. So far, we've got Fleisch and Kincaid and their grade level reading studies. And now we're moving into how many things can people keep in their brain at the same time. This comes from research that started in the late 60s. If you want to fall into a Wikipedia hole, get on Wikipedia and look up George Miller and chunking, which is a cute word, isn't it? George Miller, way back when, said, well, we only can keep this amount of like discrete chunks of information in our brain. So it's not necessarily like pieces of information. Like a phone number has 7 digits, but it really starts becoming one piece of information sooner or later. That piece of information is a chunk. Yeah. Basically, what George Miller said is that we can only keep anywhere between seven plus or minus two or so things in our head at the same time. The thing is, though, is that later studies that came along way after the 60s, they said, you know what, seven is a bit of a stretch because we've already got things in our mind. You know what I mean? And so now, here are the rules of chunking. That if we're talking about how many design elements can you have on a slide or in maybe a report, you've got a table over here and you've got a cool graphic over here and you've got another table over there. The most you can give somebody to look at one time is seven. That's it. Right. So, for example, here, check this out. If we look at this one, do you see how really what we've got going on here? Oh, hey, come on back. Really, what we've got going on here is up at the top, we've got the title, the multi-touch learning model. Yeah. 2, 3. Well, I guess if you want to count that, you can go ahead and count that. 4. Even though there's a bunch of stuff on this page, there's still only 4 things really on this page because we've tied it all together. Right? Right? Let's back up here. Here's what you get. You get 7 total design elements. More importantly, 4 things in a group. You start going past 4 things in a group and it starts looking like a lot, doesn't it? Okay, pop quiz. Ready? What does that tell us about how many bullets? if good old George Miller, who sparked all this research, comes out, and now we're putting bullet points all over the dang place, you see those great big all long list of bullets? Or somebody puts an agenda in a meeting and you're, thank you for putting an agenda, but I hate you for putting a million things on the agenda. What do you think the limit is? Any guesses? That's right, 4. 4. You're like, but we're talking about more things in the meeting than 4 things. That's not the point. The point is, do you want to make it look easy or not? Graphic design is about easy for your brain. A million bullets doesn't look easy for your brain. It doesn't matter how pretty it is. You can't make a nice graphic design anything with a whole bunch of bullets, right? Jason pops up with thoughts about like a single bullet point. There's nothing wrong with a single one bullet point as long as it's being used in a way that is strategic, right? Sometimes people just do things without thinking. One of the nice things about graphic design is that grammatic rules kind of go out the window a little bit. All caps are cool, all that business. All right, let's wrap it up here. Check it out. Here are the rules. Out of those 2 rules, the most important one, and really it's most, man, keep it to 4 chunks, right? Here, what we've got is 1, 2, 3, 4. And within that, 1, 2, 3, right? So you've got a chunk, and then within the chunk, you don't have more than 4 either. Can you kind of imagine what this would look like if it had 4 things instead of, 5 things instead of 3? Dang it, numbers, so tough. 5 things instead of 4 things starts to look a little crowded, doesn't it? So, for example, check this one out. Right, one of the things we do with gravity learning is make sure that after the learning, we treat it like a business initiative, and business initiatives get measured. People figure out ROI, right? So the way that we do that is we measure reaction, we measure whether or not people actually learned anything with little knowledge checks. We check in 30 days and say, are you guys using any of this stuff? And if you are, like, did it make an impact? Look at my 4 bullet points, how lovely. Except the thing is there's a 5th thing that we do, that we get in, and out of that impact, we get ROI numbers by saying, well, how much time did you save? Or what are the measurements around there? We use error correction that was designed by data scientists. It's all brilliant stuff. See how the 5th bullet point all of a sudden makes it look like there's a lot of stuff on the screen? It's kind of a little weird, isn't it? In this case, we had to just like, well, whatever, I guess we're going to do it. This is one of the biggest ones. Now, if you want to get deep into it, and you're like, David, I do want to get deep into it, then what a chunk really is a category, right? Remember those circles? Like each one of those was an outlined sort of category there. And the easiest way for you to chunk out information in your everyday type of stuff when you're making reports and documents and emails and slides and all that business is titles. Titles create chunks. Do you see how here's the content section? And then in the content section, there are 4 paragraphs, all of 2 lines long, right? And here's another chunk, and here's another chunk. Making sense? It's pretty neat, isn't it? By the way, we're going to get into the size here and also the spacing, what's going on with that. We're going to get into that in a minute as well. Any questions popping up that we can address? All right, fantastic. Tom says, well, should we leave that 5th bullet point for another slide? And here's the thing. Sometimes you're like, well, I guess we're just going to bend the rules a little bit. If there were 12 bullet points, we'd have to do something about it. It's just the idea is like, let's stick to the speed limit, unless, of course, we're trying to go to the hospital because our legs are falling off. In that case, there's a reason for breaking the rules. It's just knowing the rules and sticking to them when you can make sense, doesn't it? So speaking of rules, there are 3 great big graphic design rules, 3. And if you follow those, your stuff looks so much better, so much. These are the 3 rules that you can obsess on. You don't have to decide when to apply them or not because they always apply. And congratulations and happy birthday and all of that rolled up, because here they are. These are the big 3 to follow. I kind of like the design of this one, by the way. And by the way, I made all of this graphic design here, and I'm not naturally talented with this stuff. Here comes the first one. Ready? There is something built into us as human beings that bigger means better. If you look at a city skyline, the biggest building on the city skyline, most important building, isn't it? Right? You see a bunch of elephants on the Nature Channel. The big one, you're like, oh, the big one, that's the leader. It just kind of comes out in our head. Every single one of our presidents since we've had television has been 6 feet tall and over. And before that, it was all national average. It went back and forth, and 5'8" and 5'7". We had a president who sat all the time because he was in a wheelchair. If you can imagine that nowadays, it's not really a thing. Biggest truck in Texas, that's a thing. And so check it out. Here's the first rule. The first rule is you get in there and you start adjusting the size of things, right? And the idea, the rules that you're using behind your head is, well, what's most important? If it's most important, I make that bigger. Hold on a second. Check out the screen. On this slide, big rules of graphic design. On this slide, can you see how the titles look like titles? They're bigger, aren't they? And noticeably bigger too, not just a little bit. Go bigger, 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 bigger. How about the one we saw before? Can you see around and check out the importance sort of decisions that I was making when I put this together? It's pretty neat, right? So graphic design really is about communication. And the first thing you always want to communicate is how important things are. Look at this. This is the most important thing. Here, check it out. We follow a model that is scientifically designed and shown to get 180% better results as far as people using our model later, right? When they come to a workshop at Gravity Learning, they're 180% more likely to use that tool later. We'd love to talk to you about that and nerd out with it if you're into it. But either way, can you see how the 180% is the big deal here? Can you see what it would look like if I wasn't pushing that, right? If it was all the same size, it would blend, wouldn't it? Here, let me give you a before and after, right? When we're talking about that 180%, there are specific things that we do before the workshop and during the workshop and after the workshop. And so here are some of the things that add up. You see how everything is the same size? You do, right? All right, check it out now. It's quite a bit nicer looking, isn't it? The size makes a big, big difference. Hold on, let me back it up again. Here, even down, look at the citation down in the corner, to here. Size matters, right? As much as some people like to think that it doesn't. Generally, the very first thing you do after you put the content on the screen is you get in there and you make the important stuff big and the less important stuff less big. And it has to be done in a way that is clear and obvious. Like if you've got a 10-point font and a 12-point font, that's not going to do it, right? It has to be in your face. A small difference actually confuses people because our brain goes like, what is going on over there? Here's a nice little tip. Ready? Bigger, 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 bigger until you're like, dang, too big, and then back it off, right? Let it offend your sensibilities. Good. So, rule number one, get in there and make the important stuff big. Rule number two is all about neatening things up. Here, let's do something. At your desk, if you're sitting at a desk or wherever you're sitting right now, look around and we're going to spend 10 seconds, 10, lining things up on your desk. Ready? You know how you straighten and just line things up? Ready, set, line things up, go. 1, 2. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can do it as well. 4, 5, 7, 10. Things look way better now, don't they? It looks way better. Here's why. Because you line stuff up. Our brain is inherently a pattern maker. And when you make a pattern, your brain is like, I like that. That's why we like those trippy, swirly designs. We're like, whoa. Right? The easiest pattern to make is a straight line. If you make the important things big, and then you come in and line everything up, oh, nice, nice, man, it starts looking nice. That's why this thing on the screen looks nice right now. I just stuck a picture in there, made it full screen. By the way, when we teach this workshop for real, we get deep into pictures as well. Lots of tricks, very easy. And then I lined some stuff up next to it. Notice I put text in a box. So the text is very, very easy to make it look lined up too. Trick, 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 trick. Here, check it out. See how everything's all lined up nice? How about this? See how everything's all lined up nice? Right? How about this? This is our learning model that we do during the actual workshops. You see how everything is lined up on something else somewhere? Even like the edge of this lines up with the circle, and this lines up with this apple, and this lines up with the center of the apple. Here's the thing. It doesn't have to be exactly lined up edge to edge. It just has to look lined up. So if you try to make it look lined up, you did it right. Happy birthday to you. All right. You guys sticking with me here? We've got things like paragraphs are 2 lines long is the absolute best way to do it. Title the heck out of your paragraphs. In that way, we're creating chunks. If you have bullets or things like that, where there's a bunch of stuff together, 4 is the magic number. Past 4, it starts looking like a lot. Now that you've got the stuff on the screen, you make the important things big, you start lining stuff up, and now here's the one that takes the most thought. You space things out. Please, 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 please leave some empty space. I hear people talking about over and over, like, well, there's empty space, we have to fill it up. You just made something look totally full. You know, people who jam a room full of stuff doesn't look good. Same thing is true on a slide deck or a report. If you fill up the whole thing, it gets messy. Leave some space open. And then, now that you've got some space, now you can use space to create relationships. We see 2 people walking next to each other, and we're like, oh, they're together because they're next to each other. Check this out. Do you see how these little boxes down here underneath go with each other? And then the box up above goes with each other as well? Remember this one? This is just a Word doc. In fact, it's a real Word doc. I just did a screenshot of it. Now, if you look, it starts to get a little bit interesting here because this space with the red arrow is less space than this space with a blue arrow, because this section here has more to do with each other than this section has to do here. And when we look at it at a glance, your brain gets it. Your brain is like, oh, yeah, I got it. And then if you come in and add colors and some iconography, you know, Word and PowerPoint and all that stuff has a whole bunch of icons built in and it makes you look super fancy. Now all of a sudden, stuff starts looking really graphically designed. These are the big things. The big things are, ready? Man, keep paragraphs 2 lines or less. If you can at all take one thing, that will make it so much easier to read and absorb what you do. If you're titling paragraphs in chunks, people scan and they're like, that made a ton of sense. You are such a good person. If you're going to keep chunks to 4 or less, so we're mostly talking about bullets, but it could be elements on the screen as well. And then the big three design rules, that size shows importance, that you line everything up and it looks so much cleaner. And then you create space to create relationships. Now you are doing it. Notice none of that had anything to do with art, right? It's not about art. It's about communication and following some rules. After the workshop, in about a minute, we will send you all the slide deck, and we're super open. If you're thinking like, well, how can my team learn this stuff? Let's have a conversation about how your team might learn this and what it's like to participate in a live hands-on gravity workshop. For Gravity Learning, my name is David Lieberman.